2,400 years ago, a 70-year-old man lifted a cup of hemlock to his lips. His crime was not theft, not murder, not treason. His crime was asking questions. Athens sentenced Socrates to death for the most dangerous weapon ever invented. A question. Questions killed truth. While every other philosopher built systems and wrote books, this barefoot stonemason wandered the streets, asking people what they believed and watching their certainties collapse. The most powerful democracy in the ancient world could handle invading armies. It could survive plagues and civil wars. But it could not survive one old man who refused to stop thinking. Today, we open the vault on the life and death of philosophy's greatest martyr, and why the questions he asked 24 centuries ago still have the power to shatter everything you think you know. The barefoot sage. Picture ancient Athens at the height of its glory, marble temples gleaming under the Mediterranean sun, the world's first democracy humming with ambition. And there, in the middle of the bustling agora, stands a man who looks nothing like a genius, barefoot, unwashed, with bulging eyes and a flat nose his own students compared to a satyr. Barefoot, ugly genius. This was Socrates, born around 470 BC, son of a stonemason and a midwife. He had no wealth, no political title, no desire for either. While other thinkers charged fortunes for their teachings, Socrates walked the streets for free, cornering anyone willing to talk. Generals, politicians, poets, craftsmen. Nobody was safe from his relentless questioning. And every single one of them walked away shaken, because Socrates had discovered something terrifying. The people who claimed to know the most actually understood the least. The confident were ignorant, the powerful were confused. True wisdom comes to each of us when we realize how little we understand about life. But Socrates did not discover this truth on his own. It came from a prophecy that would change the course of history. The oracle's gift. One day, Socrates' friend Chaerephon traveled to Delphi, the most sacred oracle in all of Greece. He asked the priestess one question: is anyone wiser than Socrates? No one. The oracle declared that no man in Athens was wiser, but here is what makes this extraordinary. Socrates did not celebrate. He was genuinely confused, because he believed he knew absolutely nothing. How could the wisest man alive be someone who claims total ignorance? So he set out to prove the oracle wrong. He questioned the politicians who governed Athens and discovered they could not justify a single belief they held. He questioned the poets, the celebrated artists of the age. Politicians, poets, craftsmen. They could create beauty but could not explain it. He questioned the craftsmen, skilled workers who at least had real expertise, but even they assumed their knowledge extended to everything. And then the truth struck him. I am wiser than this man, for neither of us knows anything, but he thinks he knows when he does not. The oracle was right, not because Socrates knew more, because he was the only one honest enough to admit he knew nothing, but admitting ignorance was just the beginning. What he did next would make him the most hated man in Athens. The gadfly. Socrates called himself the gadfly of Athens, a tiny, biting insect that stings a large, lazy horse to keep it awake. Athens was the horse, comfortable, complacent, certain of its own superiority, and Socrates was the sting that refused to let it sleep. Every day he wandered the agora, approaching the most powerful citizens, and did the one thing they could not handle. He asked them to define their own beliefs. What is justice? What is courage? What is virtue? Simple questions that shattered the illusion of certainty. The general who commanded armies could not define courage. The judge who sentenced men could not define justice. The teacher who shaped young minds could not define knowledge. Justice, courage, virtue. These were not academic exercises. Socrates was exposing a terrifying truth. The men running Athens did not understand the very ideas they claimed to live by. If Socrates' pursuit of truth is resonating with you, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring the depths of human wisdom. Because what he did next made him the most dangerous man in the ancient world. Nobody wants to learn that their entire life is built on beliefs they cannot explain. And the more Socrates exposed this emptiness, the more enemies gathered. But he had a weapon they could not defeat. Dangerous method. Socrates never lectured, he never declared, he never told you what to think. Instead, he did something far more devastating. He asked you what you thought, and then showed you that you did not actually think it at all. This was the Socratic method, and it was intellectual demolition disguised as polite conversation. Here is how it worked. You would make a claim: I am a just man. Socrates would smile and agree. Then he would ask a small question. What do you mean by just? You would answer confidently. He would ask another question, then another, each one simple, each one reasonable, and before you realized it, your own answers had contradicted each other. You destroyed your own argument without Socrates saying a single definitive thing. He called this intellectual midwifery. Just as his mother helped deliver babies, he helped deliver truth from minds that did not know they carried it. I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. This method made him beloved by the young and despised by the powerful, because Socrates was not just questioning ideas. He was questioning the people who built their entire reputations on those ideas, and that kind of questioning has consequences. Youth corrupted. The young men of Athens were obsessed with Socrates. The sons of the wealthiest, most powerful families followed him through the streets, watching him demolish their father's arguments in real time. Youth following, watching. And they loved it. These young aristocrats began imitating Socrates, questioning their elders, challenging traditions, refusing to accept authority without reason. To us today, this sounds like education. To 5th century Athens, it sounded like revolution. Revolution. The fathers watched their obedient sons transform into relentless questioners. The priests saw young men doubting the gods. The politicians saw future leaders who would not follow orders blindly, and they all blamed one man. Socrates was corrupting the youth by teaching them to think for themselves. Consider the irony. A society that invented democracy was terrified of people who asked questions. A civilization that built the Parthenon could not handle a man who said, "Prove it." Education is the kindling of a flame, not the filling of a vessel. But the accusation of corrupting youth was only the surface. Behind the scenes, something far more political and far more dangerous was taking shape. Enemies rise. What most people do not know is that Socrates' trial was never really about philosophy. It was about politics and revenge. Athens had just survived the most traumatic period in its entire history. The city had lost the devastating Peloponnesian War to Sparta. A group of tyrants known as the 30 had seized power and unleashed a reign of terror. And two of Socrates' most famous students, Critias and Alcibiades, were directly connected to Athens' darkest hours. Critias became the cruelest of the 30 tyrants. Alcibiades betrayed Athens to its enemies. Critias' Alcibiades' betrayal. Socrates had nothing to do with their crimes. He had even publicly defied the 30 when they ordered him to arrest an innocent man. But guilt by association is a powerful weapon. The teacher was blamed for the sins of his most infamous students. 3 men stepped forward: Anytus, a wealthy politician; Meletus, a young poet; Lycon, a public speaker. Together they filed formal charges: impiety against the gods, corruption of the youth. The most brilliant mind in Athens would stand trial for the crime of making people think. And the trial that followed would become the most famous in human history. The trial. In 399 BC, Socrates stood before a jury of 500 Athenian citizens. 500 ordinary men would decide whether asking questions was a crime worthy of death. His accusers spoke first, painting him as a godless corrupter, poisoning the minds of Athenian youth. Godless corrupter, dangerous. Then Socrates rose to defend himself, and what he said was not a defense. It was a philosophical masterpiece. He did not beg, he did not apologize, he did not promise to stop. Instead, he did exactly what had gotten him arrested. He questioned the charges, he questioned his accusers' motives, he questioned the jury's understanding of wisdom itself. He turned his own murder trial into the greatest philosophy lesson ever given. He told the jury he was doing Athens a service, that a city without questioning was a city asleep, that killing him would not solve their problem because truth does not die with the man who speaks it. If you kill a man like me, you will injure yourselves more than you will injure me. The jury voted. By a narrow margin of just 60 votes, they found him guilty, but the sentence was not yet decided, and what happened next revealed the true depth of his defiance. Unexamined life. After the guilty verdict, Athenian law gave Socrates a chance to propose his own punishment. His accusers demanded death. All he had to do was suggest exile or a fine, any reasonable alternative, and the jury would likely have spared him. Instead, Socrates did the most defiant thing imaginable. He told the jury he deserved a reward. He said Athens should give him free meals at the public hall for the rest of his life, the same honor given to Olympic champions. The courtroom erupted. He was mocking them, and everyone in that room knew it. But Socrates was not being arrogant. He genuinely believed what he did for Athens was more valuable than any athletic victory. Then he delivered the line that would echo through all of human history. The unexamined life is not worth living. Unexamined life not worth. Think about what he was saying. He was facing execution, and his argument was this: a life where you never question, never reflect, never examine what you believe and why, that life is not worth having. He would rather die than stop thinking. The jury sentenced him to death, but even then, Socrates was not finished. The poison cup. Socrates spent 30 days in prison waiting for his execution. During that time, his wealthy friend Crito came to him with an escape plan. Everything was arranged. The guards were bribed. A safe house waited in another city. All he had to do was walk out. He refused. His reasoning was devastating in its simplicity. He had lived his entire life under Athenian law. He had benefited from the city's protection and freedom. To escape now would mean his entire philosophy was a lie. A man who teaches virtue cannot abandon virtue when it becomes inconvenient. On his final day, his students gathered around him. Plato recorded the scene in heartbreaking detail. Socrates was calm. His friends were weeping. He bathed himself so others would not have to wash his body. Then at sunset, the jailer brought the cup of hemlock. Socrates took it without trembling. He drank it as calmly as water. He walked until his legs grew heavy, then lay down. Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Pay it and do not neglect it. Those were his last words, a debt to the god of healing, as if death itself were the final cure. And with that, the most dangerous mind in the ancient world fell silent. But his voice was about to become louder than ever. Immortal legacy. Socrates never wrote a single word, not one sentence, not one page. Everything we know about him comes from his students, primarily Plato and Xenophon. And yet, this man who left no written record became the single most influential philosopher in the history of Western civilization. Plato, Aristotle, Western thought. Plato built an entire philosophical system on his foundation. Aristotle built on Plato, and from that chain came science, democracy, ethics, logic, and virtually every intellectual tradition the Western world depends on. But his legacy runs deeper than academic philosophy. Every time you question authority, you are channeling Socrates. Every time you refuse to accept something just because everyone believes it, his spirit lives in you. Every time you ask why, you continue his unfinished work. Athens killed him because his questions threatened power. 24 centuries later, those same questions remain the greatest weapon against tyranny, ignorance, and complacency the world has ever known. The hour of departure has arrived, and we go our ways. I to die and you to live. Which of these two is better, only God knows. Socrates had no army, no fortune, no published works. He had only his mind and an unshakable devotion to truth, and for that they killed him. No army, no fortune, only truth. But here is the ultimate irony. Athens, the mighty empire, crumbled. Its politicians are forgotten, its generals are dust, but the barefoot philosopher who owned nothing, his words still shape how billions of people think, question, and live. The man they silenced became the loudest voice in human history. So ask yourself this: what questions are you afraid to ask? What beliefs have you never examined? What comfortable lies are you holding on to because the truth feels too dangerous? Socrates died to prove that a life without questioning is no life at all. His questions are still alive. The only question that remains is whether you have the courage to ask your own. If you made it this far, comment hemlock to prove you walk among the seekers of truth. The wisdom of the ages is yours. Use it well. If this unlocked something in you, subscribe for more. The vault has more wisdom waiting.